Father, use my zest for being a student as any kind of blessing for your people. They have come to learn, they have come to think, they have come to engage their minds and engage eventually the Bible we love in a fresh and different way. Hopefully, more powerfully, more significantly. It is a precious gift. Thank you, oh God. Be with us in these moments. In Christ's name, amen. Let me again begin with a disclaimer. Again, I am not, maybe two, I am not the professor. Okay, I am not a PhD. I am a student. I just have this vociferous appetite for learning, and I can't, you just ask Susan. I enjoy painting. I hope you know how much fun that is. I even enjoy playing a game of golf every now and then, but I can't tell you how much I enjoy getting up in the morning and studying and thinking through the things that I'm sharing with you. I don't know what makes that the case, but it is. And so I'm simply sharing from a student's perspective. That also leads to the second disclaimer for today. I am not the professional historian. I am not the professional anthropologist. I am not the professional archaeologist, nor am I the expert on Israel and the Mesopotamian region. Again, I come at this as a student. So we're going to start a rather global look at things. Again, we're looking at the context for how we got the Bible and the influences that came together to give us the Bible. Sometimes it helps us to expand our minds. We have a tendency to sit down with our Bible and read through it and thank God for this wonderful gift and the way God uses it in our life, and that's a wonderful thing. But we don't stop to appreciate how we got it and how magnificent that story is, how complex that story is. So I want to go back to the beginning of time today a little bit. I want to, first of all, just remind you, as I did last week verbally, that I am using the new language for today. The former version of marking time was BC and AD. Well, in 2007, that changed. And it probably changed, above all else, it probably changed because of a reference to Christ. And of course, we have multiple religions in our world. We have atheists in our world. And so the new politically correct language is BCE, which stands for the before the Common Era, and CE. So I will be using that language throughout the presentation. I have made the shift. It didn't bother me a whole lot. It bothers some folks, but not everybody in our world is Christian, and that's what we have to remember. Okay, some attempts at dating creation. Okay, I'll let you look through that list, but let me just start with the science for a moment. I'm going to read just a moment from Adam Hamilton's Making Sense of the Bible. He has this one paragraph summary that is just the most beautiful, simplified summary I've read. But let me introduce that, first of all, by saying that the bulk of scientists today believe in what is called the Big Bang Theory. That's not necessarily an explosion like I alluded to last week in a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing. But it's the leading explanation about how the universe began. And it essentially began as a small singularity, if we're talking atom or cell or whatever, that inflated over the next 3.8 billion years. So science thinks the universe is rather old and came about in a rather slow, methodical kind of process. Then Hamilton says, Most scientists believe the Earth was formed 4.57 billion years ago out of the stellar dust left from the formation of our sun. Water came to our planet with the help of comets and asteroids and chemical reactions over the next billion years. After that, simple single-cell life forms began to develop. About 500 million years ago, an explosion of multi-cell life forms developed called the Cambrian explosion. Dinosaurs roamed the earth from 230 million years ago to about 65 million years ago. So in answer to your question, Melvin, probably not on the ark, okay? So that long time preceding that. And when a major event, perhaps a giant asteroid, struck our planet and led to a mass extinction of those prehistoric animals. Sometime around 2 million years ago, pre-human hominoids evolved, and over the next 1,900,000 years, they evolved through a process of genetic mutation and natural selection. Again, this is what scientists believe. Nature favored those with larger brain cavities and more advanced brain function. And somewhere around 100,000 to 200,000, I'm going to say 300,000, and you'll see why in my presentation. 300,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans emerged. Yet even then, it would be a long time before we think of modern humans with developed language and how they would emerge. That's just a simple summation of 13.8 billion years, okay? So that's science. Now, do all Hindus believe that the earth began or the universe began 4.3 billion years ago, or creation took? No, not necessarily. That's just one school of thought. Buddhism has nothing specific. In fact, for many of them, the universe is being created and recreated. It's cyclical, and so forth. Then Sumerian and Babylonian, this is very important. We're going to talk about this part of the region in a little bit and about these cultures. They believe the universe began about 400 years ago. The Egyptians, 40 BCE, and you see the little asterisk. That just is to remind me that that particular date is based on the mythical Turin king list. And I'll give you a picture of that in a subsequent class, of which we have some fragments from Egypt. So that comes out of that information. The Chinese believe that the world was created by Pangu. Pangu was a primordial being who affected the creation. Zoroastrianism, that's probably not a familiar group for many of you, but they're still here. This is based on an Iranian prophet named Zoroaster, and Zoroastrianism not only had elements of polytheism, but there was a strong core, and still is, of monotheism, one God, which influences the one God in our Bible. Abrahamic religions, when I say 5,000 to 4,000 BCE, James Ussher, who was a Church of Ireland archbishop in the 16th century, went through the Bible very meticulously and dated things back to the beginning of time so that he saw creation as being 4004 BCE. Okay, so that's one example of just trying to take the Bible literally and count those years back. And when I talk about the Greek and the Roman and the flood of Ogyges, that's just one of many flood stories. The Babylonians had flood stories. The Hindus have flood stories. The Chinese even have flood stories. And even the Aztecs have flood stories. So the Bible's not the only one that talks about a massive flood, and I think most of you have read that in some material in the past. So this is just a quick look at some of the possibilities of when the universe began. I tend to flow mostly with the science, although I'm not sure. You know, that's a theory at this point. I mean, it's the theory put together by mathematicians and scientists, but when you start looking at things, so I pretty well hold to how things evolved, and I'll show you some of the reason today. That doesn't mean you have to be. If you are a person who reads the Bible literally, you are not by yourself. There are a number of scholars who do, and that is quite all right, and I'm not trying to change your mind or your perspective. Again, like I said last week, I am not teaching this class from a perspective of polemics. In other words, I'm not speaking with churchianity, meaning absolutes and certainty. I want you to engage your mind and just simply think. Okay, with that, let's begin the geographical context and the early anthropological developments in the area from which we get the Bible. And it's a little larger than some of you may think. This is ancient Mesopotamia. You see the words, the Fertile Crescent. That's because the Tigris and the Euphrates run through that area, and there's a great deal of fertile land. So it's much more it's much more conducive to agrarian productivity as opposed to the desert and mountainous areas around it. The yellow, although yours is showing up much better. The yellow areas are somewhat arid lands or mountain regions, and so this is called the Fertile Crescent. It's also considered the cradle of civilization. Why? Because it's at this point in time, for archaeology, this seems to be where urbanization began to really take place. And so people coming together and living together in groups. So it's simply referred to frequently as the cradle of civilization. And this is how that area would look today. You can see Saudi Arabia, you can see below Yemen and so forth, and then to the right you can see Iran, above you can see Turkey, you can see Egypt, and let me see if I can get this to work. Right there is little Israel. Look at how strategically located it is between Egypt and Turkey and Iran and Syria, modern day Jordan. It is just so strategically located, and part of the reason why there are so many hegemonies that will evolve, that influence the Hebrew people, their development, and the development of the Bible. Okay, so the earliest human remains we know about are from Jebel Hirad, Morocco. So just think of Morocco, dating to some 315,000 BCE. Humans then appear to have migrated out of Africa into the Middle East area. And I will give you some evidence. That was probably around anywhere from 177,000 BCE to 194,000 BCE. And from there, the migration began to go in a lot of directions. As you can see, it goes through Eurasia. You can see it goes down about 40,000 BCE to Australia, to the northeastern parts of Siberia. And from there, apparently, across, now you can't tell, but from this part of the map over here, it's a short distance connecting, if the globe is like this, okay? It's a short cross, it's not all the way across the map. This is a globe picture, so it wouldn't be that far. It is right now theorized that in the longest time that people crossed over an ice bridge, if you wish, into Alaska, and then down through Canada into the western part of the United States and the northwestern part of the United States. Now today, there's another theory that's beginning to take some precedence that says people came to the United States by boat as well as across the land bridge, okay? So anyway, our concern is with this area right here, with the Mesopotamian area, and so people came into that region at least by maybe as early as 200,000 BCE. So let's talk a little bit about the prehistoric Stone Age, or the Paleolithic period particularly, where humans migrated from Africa, as I just showed you, and about 200,000 years. Human remains have been discovered, and I'm going to show you some of those human remains in just a moment. Teeth and a jawbone. I'm going to show you some of what the archaeologists have discovered and scientists have discovered from this region. There's a significant evidence of stone tools, obviously, and stone utensils that have been shaped out of stone or rocks, and evidence of people living together in open air campsites, but mostly we'll talk about caves. I'll show you a sample of what scientists think, archaeologists think might be circled. In the Epipaleolithic period, I'll get it, Paleolithic period, some 20 to, in other words, the end of the period, 20 to 10,000 BCE, there's evidence that supports the nomadic movement of groups going from one place to another. Some religious behavior. When I talk about that, or at least some religious consciousness, it's really primarily, archaeologists think, in ancestral worship or burial rites. But perhaps there's that thinking we talked about last week, that we see evidence in every culture of some being, some super being beyond one's individual self or humanity that is responsible for our being here. Circular pit houses, and I'll show you a sample of that in just a moment. Plants are now being domesticated for crops and food at this point in time. According to archaeologists, summaries and conclusions based on what they're finding. Wild animals are obviously being domesticated by this point and being used for farm animals, for food sources, for travel, etc. So here is it. I can't see it very well, and I'm sorry, it didn't show it very well. I'll have to use another. Oops, let me go back. Oh, there. What I'm trying to do is, the area is right here. You can barely see the circle. This is Mount Carmel Central Plain. Okay, so I'll have to use a different color from now on. I'm sorry. And this is where we're going to find some of the more significant archaeological discoveries, which is just south of Haifa in Israel today. And again, we're talking about how the people come to this area and then how the Bible evolves from this people. Okay, so always keep that end goal in mind. I'm just kind of getting there through a global map. Okay. One of the places along there in that, it was just really right on the edge of the Mediterranean, just a little way over. The mountains come off in cliffs, and there are several caves in there. This is one of the prehistoric dwellings that they have discovered in the Mount Carmel plain. The Mislaya cave is a very, very important discovery. This is where they're going to find the human remains. It is a collapsed cave where these discoveries were made, and so I'm going to show you an overhead view. This is an overhead view. Now remember, the covering of the cave has somewhat collapsed and fallen in, and they've just been able to dig through the debris and find the discoveries that are important. Like the jawbone from Mislaya Cave is 177 to 194,000 BCE. It's found in this cave along the side of Israel. Now, there were also some other discoveries in there as well. There are other pieces along with that, but we'll see some more. So here on a map, again, this is the Mediterranean here, and this is the Mislaya Cave, and this is the Skull Cave that I showed you earlier. Okay, they were all right there together, and there are several others along that way. Now, we're going to see other digs or archaeological digs that will give evidence to the development of life in this area. This is one estimation of archaeologists of how the pit houses were made. They were made from mammoth bones, and they would probably still have been here during the 200,000 period, the bones especially, though the creatures have pretty well disappeared, the mammoth bones, to build a pit house. So I suspect most of them were built with stones and logs and various combinations like that. This is a woven basket that has only been announced. They found it just not too long ago, but it was announced in March of this year, March the 21st, in the Jerusalem Post. And I'm going to show you how this is a woven basket. It is the oldest known woven basket that dates back to 10,500 BCE. And this puppy is huge. I mean, it would hold several gallons of water if it were water sealed or, tight, but of substance. So it is really, you can see how large this thing is. And this was discovered just not too long ago. In this same area, in this same Judean cave, which is it's called the Cave of Horror, because they found some 40 skeletons, mummified skeletons in the cave as well, along with several other things. So this is an important find in terms of dating people during this period of time. This Neolithic period dig predates many of the other discoveries that are happening. During the Neolithic period, construction begins to be much more sophisticated, much more complex. And one such dig site is in Şanlıurfa, Turkey. It's called Göbekli Tepe. I put the pronunciation up there for you. This is the site. Archaeologists are still not sure what this was, whether it was just a social gathering center, whether it was a worship center, or whether it served some not archaeological, but some astrological, kind of like some of the things that we would find among the Aztecs and the people in South America. So they're not real sure yet, but if you can see, you can probably only see a line across here. That's actually a creature that has kind of like a fish, sort of, but it's a creature that's on there as well. So the construction is getting a little more sophisticated at this point. And this discovery predates the Stone Age or the Stonehenge monuments that you see in England by 6,000 years. So pretty significant. And by the way, this is where that is located, and as most of you are familiar with current events, this would be Kurdistan, essentially the Kurdish area, the geopolitical and geographical area of the Kurds. We continue with the Neolithic period, and we find evidence of settlements, early village life by 6 to 4,000 BCE in this area as well, changing from hunting and gathering to farming, You can see some of the transition. They're increasing to size. I'm going to show you some of the communities in just a moment, some of the dig sites. Wheels are first used for pottery, so we're beginning to see the development of the wheel as well and using it in making pottery. Some city-states begin to appear, so people are now beginning to congregate. There are enough people that they're beginning to congregate in communities. So by 4,500 BCE, and we are still at least 2,000 years before Abraham. Okay, so as we come through the Bible, this is just some of them. The pictographs are like what you would see in the Egyptian stuff that you've seen on TV, but the ideograms are like an eye, for example, or a sun with the rays out. That would be an ideogram, or a picture of a half moon. Those would be more the ideograms, but you see development of both of those. So communication and some kind of language, because they're gathering in the city-states. They need to be able to communicate with each other. And I'll talk more about communication next week. This period includes an ancient village that has been found in Iraq. The city is Jarmo. It was an agricultural community that was discovered in 1940. Covers about 3 to 4 acres. It's pretty significant coverage there, with an estimated population at that time of about 150 people, carbon dated to, as you can see, 7,000 plus. And here's where it is located. And this is what it looked like. This was a large Bronze Age megalopolis, found sometime in 1923. I'm actually going to show you one later as that. But this is like it. It covers, again, this 3 to 4 acres. And this is a model of the Jarmo house. In the Chalcolithic period of time, this is a transitional period from Neolithic to the Bronze Age. It comes from the Latin word meaning copper. Smelting and metallurgy begin to be evident in the dig sites, and copper is widely used for, you can see the things that I've listed there. Crops now include barley, wheat, lentils, fruit trees, so things are beginning to develop. But there's still no evidence of an organized religion, meaning that priests are in charge of leading. There's still the evidence of the burial rites and things like that, and ancestral worship, but still no organized religion at this point, or no evidence. In the Bronze Age, we're much more agrarian, and we're going to have a wide evidence of smelting, turning copper and tin into bronze, which is a harder substance, and so they can use that for making of weapons. They also use it for sculptures, chariots. And now we have some evidence of organized religious practice. So some of the communities are probably beginning to be theocracies. When Israel first evolves as a nation in the covenant with Abraham, God is king. That is a theocracy. It isn't until about 1000 BCE when people decide they want a king, and Saul is elected as the first king. But in the first 1,000 years of their existence, or 800 plus, Israel was a theocracy. And these little city-states were probably the same way. Tel Ensur is a huge megalopolis. They think that maybe the population here was upwards of 5,000 to 6,000 people in this particular community. And this is in Israel. I'll give you a slide in just a moment to take a look at that. The civilization seems to be quite organized at this point. It was discovered in 1977, but the exploration has only been about 5 years ago that they've really begun to explore this particular site. Interestingly, they call this area the New York City of archaeological digs in Israel. It was a pretty good sized place. And in it was apparently a temple. And so here now again, another evidence of the organized religion. The temple had a huge basin, or maybe we should say baptistry, a place for cleansing before worship. And so when we see things develop in the Bible, we tend, if you're a literalist, well, God gave them the instruction to do that. That's how that happened. Well, a lot of it is borrowed probably from some of the other cultures, or at least influenced, and God used that information. In my mind, God superintended the development of these things, using what was common to their area. Tel Shur is below Haifa and just west of the West Bank. So let me go to some early political developments. Some of the hegemonies, or the people who evolve in large enough groups to have power and control over all people in their region. And laws. When we think of the law in the Bible, I'm going to show you 3 preceding laws in that region, or groups of laws, that could have well influenced the shape of the laws that we find in the Bible. In ancient Mesopotamia, we're going to start talking first of all about the Sumerians here. Uruk is here. This is Ur, from which Abraham will come. And of first importance, the Sumerian people, the Sumerian dynasties emerge about 5,300 years BCE. The Ubaid period is the first, and the Uruk dynasty is the second. But they are within that Sumerian region that I just showed you. The first would coincide with the emergence of Egyptian culture and pharaohs and so forth. Some of the ancient gods, because this was, as I said on that previous slide, quite polytheistic, some of the ancient gods, and their archaeologists conclude that there were probably as many as 100 different gods. And I've just given you some of the major ones that keep showing up in some of the archaeological discoveries. And the names differed from one culture to the next. We're talking about Sumerian at this point, but look at the god Utu becomes Shamash in the next major group of leaders. It's like the Assyrians and the Babylonians as we get into the biblical period. It just becomes one power after another overtaking another. Well, the Akkadians will be next. During the Uruk dynasty, the ideographic writing began to develop more, become a little bit more sophisticated. There's greater use of the wheel. We had already seen where they were using it for pottery in this area and region. And then for a few hundred years, we have a mix of Sumerian dynasties. So And Gilgamesh is one of the best known. And the reason I emphasize Gilgamesh is, I'll show you in just a moment. This is a statue that some archaeologists believe might be Gilgamesh, but there's no definitive. But it would be typical of how a king looked during that period of time. This is the Epic of Gilgamesh, and that's what's important. Though Gilgamesh was most likely a real king, there's no confirmation to that. It could be that he was a mythical king, but the archaeologists and scientists believe that he was a real king. This epic tale is probably quite mythological. It is not necessarily true, and probably not. Was composed about some 800 years after Gilgamesh, probably 1500, maybe 1700 BCE. And Gilgamesh is described as a demagogue of superhuman strength who befriends a wild man named Enkidu, and together they embark on numerous journeys as friends, defeating Humbaba, the bull of heaven, who is sent to attack them by Ishtar. So there are all of these players in here, a Mesopotamian goddess, after Gilgamesh refuses to be her consort. So this is the punishment that Ishtar wishes upon Gilgamesh. When Enkidu dies of some disease, he's sent as a punishment to Gilgamesh, but he becomes his friend. And he visits a sage during this period of time, Gilgamesh does, and it's called about a great flood. So here's a reference to the flood of the earth before the flood story appears in the Bible, and it comes from this particular region. And all Gilgamesh is trying to do is find immortality. But he is not successful. He repeatedly fails the trials that are set before him, and eventually he returns back home to Uruk, realizing that immortality is beyond his individual effort and reach. So, the interesting piece about this, and again, this is just one of 12 tablets, okay? The interesting thing about, first of all, there's script that's readable, okay, by this time. And we'll talk more about the development of speech and writing next week, but there's that. But the other thing is the reference to this global flood. Come back, and now we have moved from Sumeria and control. The Akkadians are in control of this region. Okay? Here is Nineveh when we get to talking about the Assyrians later on, but right now we're still let's talk about the Akkadians. During the Akkadian Empire, the people are very quite nomadic, although they are congregating and living in communities, and there are more people to do that because the population is expanding in the region. They speak Akkadian, whereas in the Sumerian culture they spoke Sumerian. These are the precedents, the preceders of Hebrew, the combination of Akkadian and Sumerian languages. And again, I'll talk about that next week, but this is the importance of this culture. We not only have a power, we not only have some exercise of control, we're going to begin to see the need for law and some kind of order among the people. I'm going to talk just a moment about Sargon. He was known as the anointed priest of Anu, but he was really the king of Kish at first and then became the king of the Akkadian Empire, and he's the one who conquered most of the Sumerian control. He was also known as the great Ensi of Enlil. Remember, that was one of the gods that was on that list a little earlier, the Lord of the open, the God of the air and the earth. but he would later be defeated by another group of Sumerians. So that's why I'm calling it Neo-Sumerians. This is the bronze head of an Akkadian ruler on the left of the screen. And on the right that's a stele. Stele is a stone monument. Most of them are tall and narrow. I'm going to show you one here in a minute. Most of them are tall and narrow. They widen at the base a little bit, but they are basically pencil-like, if you wish. And on this particular one is what archaeologists believe is a image of Sargon, the king. There was another little community that developed for just a while, Gutian control. It wasn't very long. And then we get back to the Neo-Sumerian who really influenced the area, the region. And the base now has been moved from Uruk to Ur, southern Mesopotamia. And we have the first law code, the law code of Ur-Nammu, the oldest known code of the law dealing with crime and punishment, dated to sometime around 2100 to 2050 BCE. And this is probably the start of the migration of people from southern Mesopotamia through northern Mesopotamia across what today is Syria and down into what is today Israel. This is the beginning. May have been, there are different dates for Abraham's migration. I'm going to use the traditional date of 1850, but it could have been as early as 2200, 2300, could have been during this period of time. Okay? The dynasty of Ur, which is kind of a Neo-Assyrian period that we'll be talking about. Ur dynasty artifacts. The picture on the left, these are pictograms, and this is the king at war on the top and the king at peace on the bottom. And one of the helmets that probably would have been worn by the soldiers during this period of time out of gold. Well, something happened. That's supposed to be labeled Ur-Nammu. I don't know what happened to my label. Oh, I see it. It is there. It's just in yellow, and it doesn't show up. I'll have to remember that yellow doesn't show up on the slides. This is the law code of our Ur-Nammu, a chunk of it anyway. Then we get to the first Assyrian Empire. So that shouldn't have said Neo-Syrian a moment ago. It should have said pre-Assyrian. The first Assyrian Empire in northern Mesopotamia, about 2000 BCE, and probably the time of Abraham's migration, or let me at least say the traditional date. All of that's up for debate these days. There's no way to actually verify when that actually happened. And we have another set of laws. The laws that come from a city called Nuzi. And these are some of the Nuzi tablets. Just 3 of several. Anybody read that? Yeah. I can't either. And here's where Nuzi is located. It's located because I'm starting with the Babylonian Empire next. That's why this slide. So it's located a little bit out of the area that we've been talking about. This is primarily the area we've been talking about. Now, Nuzi's a little bit further north. We're getting up closer to Nineveh. And so the first Babylonian, now why do I say first Syrian and first Babylonian? Because in the Bible we're going to get to another Assyrian and another Babylonian period, and those date from 722 to somewhere around 596, and then 596 is the Babylonian period, and then they have the exile, and then you have the Persian period, and we'll date all of that later. But this is the first. They're still using a combination of the two languages that have come out of the Akkadian and the Sumerian culture. One of the later dates for Abraham's migration is 1750. So it's possible that that happened then. But Hammurabi, I want to always say Hammurabi, but I think it's Arabi, is an Amorite in the Babylonian Empire. And he develops the Code of Hammurabi. I'm going to go ahead and use Hammurabi. It's my favorite way of pronouncing it. And among the things it says is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Does that sound familiar? So we tend to think that the Hebrew people got this message from God and it just came out of the blue, when probably God is working with the human. Let me say probably. Jerry Black's perspective is that God is using the human product and using a lot of what is already common to the people in the area. I still think God is behind this. God is the superintendent, if you wish, but using a lot of information that's already there. You can see that half of these laws, there are 282 of them, and half of them deal with contracts, and a third deal with family issues, as do the laws we find in the Bible. This is the law code of Hammurabi. It's on one of these steles. It is about 8 feet tall and about 2-something feet at the base. And on the right, though not very clear, is part of the script from that stele. You can see where the script is written in this part. There's this image on the front. So let's take Abraham out of Ur, move him up a bit in the Sumerian or the Akkadian or now the Assyrian or now the Babylonian Empire, up through Nineveh, around Haran, all the way over to Israel. So he makes this long trek because God has called him and asked him to move. So there is now, if Abraham is responding to God, there is in this region not just polytheism, there is a sense of monotheism, of one supreme God who speaks to Abraham. Okay? So that evolution or development, if you like that word, evolution bothers some people. The development over the time from 177 194 BCE, over time of people expanding and their ability to do things, and metallurgy and sculpting and writing is beginning to take place. Now there is a sense of one supreme being somewhere that Abraham picks up on. When we get to the Bible, this is a traditional time frame. When you talk about the creation, the flood, the Tower of Babel, those are prehistorical. Chapters 1 through 11 of Genesis, there's no way to date any of that really. Are they narrative? Are they literal accounts? I'm going to leave that with you to decide. I'm not trying to influence that one way or another. For me, they are narrative. They are a way of the people trying to explain their universe and how they fit into the universe. And that, for me, is just as valid as reading it as a literal event. Okay? I'm not sure the Tower of Babel actually happened. It was a way of describing how languages evolved. But that's Jerry Black. I'm not trying, again, to force you into that camp. Believe me, there are scholars who are not in that camp at all, who resist it completely. So you wouldn't be by yourself. Then we have the family stories of Israel's ancestry. And those are powerful in themselves. If they are not true, if they were made up later even, depending on your particular perspective and translation, they are still powerful. There is power in those stories about Abraham's movement and the miracle of the birth of Isaac, and the dissension between Hagar and Sarah. There's power in those stories for us, because we live in a world of tension and differences of opinion, do we not? And sometimes people aren't always treated, even in our families. Abraham doesn't treat Hagar very well, but God takes care of her. There's just real power in those, whether they are literal or not, for me at least. There's the time in Egypt. Folks, we have no archaeological evidence that supports the Exodus or even the conquests. Out of the 20 some odd cities that Joshua is told to go in, and as you read for us last week, Tammy, essentially conduct genocide, kill everybody because they'd be a bad influence. There's no evidence to that. There, 4 or 5 of the communities show destruction during the period that would probably be the conquest. But they're just, and I need to say, there isn't any archaeological evidence yet. That doesn't mean there won't be. There just isn't any yet in the Sinai Peninsula to support 2 million people crossing the desert together and coming into Canaan and conquering it. Instead, what there is evidence that's beginning to surface that people migrated out of the land of Moab. Oh gosh, I've gone over my time. I'm sorry. I'll go. I've got 2 more slides. Out of Moab into the Israeli, into the land of Canaan, and those may have really become the Israelites. But that's just at this point in time what we know. Then we get to the United Monarchy. Now we're beginning to see a little bit of evidence to support that, and I'll show some next week. You can see when pieces of the Bible fit, but you can also see that sometimes things like Jonah is considered a story and fits with the writings as opposed to being a real prophet, and maybe fits somewhere. Daniel 1-4 fits maybe in the Neo-Assyrian. Daniel 5 maybe fits in the Neo-Babylonian. Maybe the whole thing fits during the Persian Empire, or really the Greek Empire is when it's supposedly, the Ptolemies. So, let me conclude real quickly and get out of the way. So from creation to Abraham, just a short trip today, huh? From creation to Abraham, African migration to Mesopotamia, technological developments along the way. We've just seen just a sampling of those developments. The rise of civilization, the population is increasing, there's more order, there's more organization. There are 3 sets of laws that we already have in place before the Bible. We have the empirical struggles. We've gone from Sumerian to Akkadian to Assyrian to Babylonian, and in between a couple of others. So with all the empirical struggles, the hegemonies, the framing of laws, the story of the Bible emerges. So this is the geopolitical historical context for our Bible, which for me, I love our Bible. Okay? And that will give you a break. God's blessings, and thanks for giving me the time. And musicians, forgive me for going 10 minutes over. I'll try to be more disciplined. Okay? Thank you.